up? Jack here with devslopes.com. Welcome back to our API course. And in the last lesson, we just built our data service out. In this one, we're going to continue on and build our auth service, which will handle authentication and authorization. So let's just jump right into it and keep rolling. The first thing we need to do is create a new file. So I'm going to right click on services here. We're going to create a new Swift file. And I'm going to just call this authservice. And this is going to be a class. And again, it's going to be a class because this is going to be a singleton. All right. So to start with, we need to set some computed properties on here. So let's go ahead and do that. First thing I'm going to do is say let defaults equal user defaults.standard. Now the reason I'm doing this is just so I don't have to type this out all the time. I can just use defaults. So for our computed properties, I'm going to have one called isRegistered. And it's a bool, not a book, an optional bool. And we're going to have a getter and a setter. So for our getter, we're going to return defaults.bool for key. And for the key, we're going to come over to our constants. And we're going to create some Boolean auth user defaults keys. Now the reason I'm doing this is so when I refer to these, I don't take a chance on having a typo or something and typing in the wrong thing. So the defaults registered constant is going to be isRegistered. And then we're going to have defaults authenticated. And that one is equal to isAuthenticated. All right, so let's save that. And let's see. Let's go ahead and come back to our auth service. So for key here is going to be our defaults registered. So basically, we're just going to check to see if this is true. If it is, we're going to return it. And then for the setter, we're going to say defaults.set new value for key defaults registered. All right. So now then we need the same thing for isAuthenticated. We need a getter and a setter for it. And here we're going to return defaults.bool for key, and this one is defaults authenticated. And then for our setter, there's our setter. Now we need a couple more constants in here. So let's go back to our constants file. And we need one for auth email. And this is going to be we're just going to call it let defaults email equal email. And then we're going to have one for our auth token. And that's just going to be auth token. And again, these are just in here to keep me from making a typo. So we're going to come back over to our auth service again. And we're going to set up some more computed properties here. And we're going to return defaults email as an optional string. And then for set, we're just going to say defaults.set and defaults email there. All right. So that takes care of email. So we got is registered, is authenticated, email, and we're going to have one for our auth token. And it's an optional string as well. Let me make some space here so we can see this better. So we're going to say we've got our getter. We're going to say return defaults.value for key defaults token. There it is. As string. And then we've got our setter. For defaults token. Okay. So that takes care of those. So we've got our auth token, email, is authenticated, is registered. These are all computed properties. So now we can go ahead and start creating our functions in here. So we're going to have two. We're going to have one for register and one for login. Now these are very similar to the ones we created in the last video, but we're going to go ahead and step through them here. So our first one is register user. And we're using our same callback here. All right. Left out a colon there. All right. So here we need to set up our JSON. So we'll say let JSON is equal. And we'll just keep this all in one line here. All right. So there's our JSON. So now we need to do our session config. And we need to create our session. All right. So far, so good. Now we've got to check our URL. Now we don't have a URL here. We need to go back to our constants again. And we've got to create our register URL. And let me make some space here. So our register URL, and it's a post request. So you see I prefixed these with get or post, whatever they are. So we'll say post register account equal base API URL / account / register. If you'll remember the endpoint from our from back in the main part of the course. Now I'm going to go ahead and put in the login URL here too. And that's base API URL / account / login. All right. So there's our URL. So let's go back over here to our auth service. So we've got our session, and now we need that guard statement for the URL. And that's a string. All right, now here we're going to do a little different. Instead of putting it on one line, we're going to say is registered as false. And then we're going to call our completion with false. And return. So that's how we're going to handle that. Now we need to move on to our request. And we need to set our method. And we need to add a header. And our header is the application/JSON here. For header content-type. Now, if you'll remember, for register and login, they're post requests, but we don't have to have that authentication or authorization token to post to those routes. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to ever log in. So that's why we've only got one header here. And now that we've got that, we can go ahead and do our do block here. And in our do block, we can say request.http body is equal to, and I'm going to do this all on one line. And some of the other ones I separated them, but we're going to go ahead and do this all on one line here. We'll say try JSON serialization.data. And then for our options, we're going to say, we're just going to have an empty array for our options. So that's how we'll handle that. And then we're going to go ahead and create our task. Data task with URL request. And our request is our request. All right, so there's our task. So now we can check if our error is nil or not. And if it is, we've got success. Otherwise, failure. So in our success case here, we'll say let status code equals response as HTTP URL response dot status code. All right. So then we're going to print URL session task succeeded. And we'll print out our status code here. All right. Now then, we need to check our status code here. And the reason being is, if you'll notice, or if you remember from our API, the register and login functions were the endpoints were two separate things. You had to register first, and then you got that. You registered first, and it gave you a message whether you were successful or not. If you were, then you could go back and hit the login endpoint, and that's where you get your token back. So in order to make this a one-step process in our app here, I'm going to chain these together. So basically, we're going to get back one of three things in this register request here. We're going to get back either a 200, which means okay, the account was registered, created. Or we may get back a 409, which a 409 means that the account already exists. And in either one of those two cases, I don't really care because at that point I have a user. So then we can move on to the login and try to log in. If we get back anything other than a 200 or a 409, then it's a failure. But if we get back a 409, it just means the registration failed. Then we can move on and try to log in with that user's username and password. So that's the thing behind this. So we're going to check for a status 200 or 409. So we'll say if status code is not equal to 200 and status code is not equal to 409. So if it's not equal to either one of those, then we failed. So we'll say self.isRegistered equals false. And then we'll call our completion handler with false and return. All right. Else, if it is a 200 or a 409, then we're successful here. So we're going to say self.isRegistered equals true. And we'll call our completion handler with the true boolean there. All right. Hopefully you followed that logic. It's not that complicated, but it's a little different. So in our failure block here, we can just print URL session task failed. And then we can print out our error. Completion false. All right. And then we can come right here and say task.resume and session.finish tasks and invalidate. All right. Now in our catch block here, we need to self.isRegistered is false. And then completion is false. And then we can go ahead and just print our error. Okay. So that should do it for our register call. Hopefully you followed along with that. Basically, we're doing the same thing we've been doing. The only difference is we're just checking for a 200 or a 409. And if we get one of those two things, then we know we're registered and we can continue on and try to log in. So let's move on and let's finish up here with our login call. So it's pretty much the same signature that this one up here had. But this one's going to be for login. So we're going to set it up the same way. All right. Got our session config again. And we'll create our session. And we'll pass in our session config, nil and nil. All right, now we need to guard that, and I've already created that login URL if you'll remember. And that was post login account. And if this fails, we need to call our completion handler false. And we will also do is authenticated as false. Got those kind of backwards there. And then at that point, we'll go ahead and return. All right. So now we can set up our request. Pass in our URL. Set up our HTTP method. We got to add a header. And our header is going to be the application/JSON. And the header field is content-type. All right. Now we're ready to start off our do block here. And in our do block, we could say request.http body. And if you'll remember, this is how we did it above. We did this in one step. We'll say try JSON serialization .data with JSON objects. And we're just going to have an empty array for the options. All right. So now then, errors thrown not handled. I haven't put the catch block in there yet. Let's go ahead and do that. All right. So there's our do block. We've got a catch in there now. It'll quit complaining. So now we can create our task. And our request is request. Completion handler like usual. All right, so now then we can check for an error. If it's nil, we're successful. Otherwise, we failed. So in our success here, we'll go ahead and check our status code like normal. All right, so we're continuing on like normal here. So we just checked that. So now we'll check to see. Now in the login, we need back a 200. If we don't get 200, something's wrong. So we're just going to say if status code is not equal to 200, then we failed. Login failed. So all we're going to do is call our completion handler with false, and then return. So then here we'll say else. And here we're just making sure that we've got data back. Regarding that data, that we're able to assign data to data. Otherwise, we're going to get out of this. So we're just guarding that we've actually got some data here. And the reason we're doing that is we've got another do block here. And the reason we've got another do block is because we're going to grab the JSON data coming back, and we're going to grab the token out of it and store that. So what we need to do is say let result equal try JSON serialization .json object with data And we're going to pass in data here, which is what we did right here. And for options, we're going to say dot allow fragments. And we're going to do a cast here of type dictionary, string, any object. So we're assigning, we're taking our data. See, this data coming back is just data. It's not JSON, or it's not deserialized. So we're taking this data and deserializing it and put it into a JSON object. And assigning that into this result here. So when we're done, it'll be a dictionary of type string and any object if it's successful. So we need to say if result is not equal to nil, then we can start checking. So we'll say if let email is equal to result user, and that's actually optional, so I got to put a question mark there, as a string, and then we can check for a token. If let token is equal, and that's result. If token is equal to result subtoken as string, so if we reach this point, we have successfully authenticated and we have a token. So then we can set self.email is equal to email, self.authToken is equal to token, self.isRegistered is equal to true. Now this is probably already true. We're just going to set it again here just to make sure. And then we can say self.isAuthenticated is equal to true. So hopefully that makes sense. If we get to this point, we're using these if-lets here to grab these values and making sure that they're what we expect, which are strings. And then if we get into this block right here, we've successfully authenticated and have a token. And then we're setting email, all these user defaults up here, we're setting these values. Pretty cool stuff, if you ask me about it. So once we do that, then we can call our completion handler and pass it true because we were successful. And then we need to come down through here and we're going to pass off false to all these ifs. Our completion handler. So if any one of these fails, we're going to pass false to our completion handler. And then when we get to this catch let error, we'll do the same thing. And then, let's see, we get to this failure block here. And this is our task here. So we're going to do the same thing we've been doing. And return. And then right here, we need to do task.resume, not response.resume. And then we need to say session dot finish task and invalidate. And then we've got this final catch block here. And we'll do our completion handler there as well. So pretty cool stuff. Let's see, I'm still showing 3 errors. Let's save this. Let's try to build it and see if we get any errors. Let's see what these are. Oh, okay. So that was a mistake. It should be token there. So let's try to build it again and see what we've got. Hey, we succeeded. Okay, so we don't have anything obviously wrong with our data services here. I think we're pretty good to go. I hope you followed along with me. I know it can seem complicated. If you use Alamo Fire or some library like that, it makes it a little bit easier. But then you're depending on third-party libraries in your code. It's kind of a trade-off. It's whatever you want to do. Personally, I like URL requests and URL session. They're pretty cool, and they're not that difficult once you get the hang of them. So anyway, we're going to wrap this up. We're getting kind of long here. This is the biggest part of the core of the section in this iOS app, probably. We've still got to build our views out. We're probably going to have one video for each view we do. And I'll show you how to hook those up and use this data service and our models. So anyway, we're going to call that quits, call it a wrap on this one, and we'll move on over and start on our views. So we'll see you in the next video.